There is something deeply exhausting about being emotionally available to someone who is never really present for you. You reply fast. You make time. You say yes, even when you're tired, even when you're uncertain, even when you secretly wish they would ask you how you are. And what do you get in return? A read message with no reply. A vague, "I've just been busy." A presence that disappears when you need it most. Let's be honest, you think being always available will prove your worth. That if you show up more, give more, stay longer, they'll finally see you, finally choose you, finally give you the love you've already given them 10 times over. But the truth is, the more available you are, the less valued you become. Human nature doesn't reward certainty. It craves contrast. It craves mystery. It craves meaning. And when you're always there, always replying, always giving, you become part of the background. You become the silence they no longer hear, because you've always been the sound. Let me tell you about Ella. She was the kind of woman who always answered the phone, always replied within seconds, always rearranged her schedule to fit into his. She believed that consistency was love, that if she gave enough, he'd eventually reciprocate, and for a while, felt like it might work. He texted when he needed comfort. He called when he was bored. He showed up when it was convenient for him. But one day, Ella realized something devastating. He never asked her how she felt. He never stayed when she was hurting. He never gave without first taking. And she felt drained, confused, angry, but most of all, empty. Because when you give your energy, your time, your emotional labor to someone who never gives it back, you don't just lose them, you lose parts of yourself. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But how can you become who you truly are if you're always adjusting to who they want you to be? How can you be whole if every piece of you is given away for crumbs of affection? There's a reason why you feel so tired, and it's not just because you're working too much or not sleeping well. It's because emotional availability without boundaries is a silent energy leak. It's invisible, but it's constant. It's the mental checking, the emotional waiting, the inner negotiating, the "should I say something?" The "maybe I'm too much?" The "did I do something wrong?" That cycle repeats every day, and you call it love. But it's not love, it's self-erasure. What if, just for a moment, you paused? What if you stopped being so available? Not to punish, not to manipulate, but to notice. To notice how much of your time is spent in fear of losing someone who isn't even afraid of losing you. To notice how much effort you give without being asked, without being thanked, without being seen. To notice how little you ask for in return, because deep down, you're afraid even that would be too much. Emotional detachment begins with that noticing, the silent moment where you realize you've been proving your worth to someone who never required it, not because they're cruel, but because you taught them that you don't require much. And the cruelest part? You don't even know how to stop. But here's the thing. Detachment doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you stop abandoning yourself in the name of love. It means you can still care, still be kind, still show compassion. But now you ask yourself, does this cost me my peace? Am I being present because I want to, or because I'm afraid not to be? You are not needy. You are not dramatic. You are not too emotional. You are simply someone who has been too generous with your energy, too tolerant with imbalance, too patient with people who never earned your presence. And that ends today, because your attention is currency, your availability is sacred, your presence is a privilege. Stop offering it to those who treat it like an option, and you'll begin to see that the most powerful kind of detachment isn't bitter, isn't loud, isn't dramatic. It's peaceful, it's quiet, it's choosing yourself without apology. We've been told that to love means to hold on, to insist, to stay. We've been taught that leaving, pulling back, or creating distance is cold, is immature, is selfish. But what if emotional detachment isn't about leaving others, but about finally coming back to yourself? People misunderstand detachment. They think it's about silence, indifference, being unavailable, pretending not to care. But real detachment has nothing to do with pretense and everything to do with peace. It is not, I don't care about you anymore. It is, I will not abandon myself to keep you interested. It is not, I'm cutting everyone off. It is, I am choosing not to be drained by what I cannot control. It is not, I'm playing hard to get. It is, I know my worth and I no longer feel the need to prove it. This kind of detachment is quiet. It's invisible at first. It doesn't come with drama, or blocked calls, or angry texts. It comes the moment you stop begging, the moment you stop explaining, the moment you stop bending to fit into someone else's limited vision of who you should be. Let's talk about Sarah. She was always the understanding one, the one who forgave quickly, who waited patiently, who stayed silent when he pulled away, because she believed that love meant tolerance, that loyalty meant endurance, that presence meant never leaving. But one night, after another argument, another cold shoulder, another "you're overthinking again," she sat alone in her room, not crying, not angry, just tired. That night, she didn't send the usual follow-up message, didn't write the apology, didn't try to fix things she didn't break. She simply let the silence stay, and for the first time in months, she felt a strange, quiet relief, not because he changed, not because he texted back, but because she finally stopped waiting. Emotional detachment isn't the absence of care. It's the presence of self-respect. It's what happens when you realize you've been shrinking yourself to keep someone else comfortable. It's what happens when you get tired of begging for love that was supposed to be freely given. It's what happens when you understand that being emotionally available should not come at the cost of your emotional stability. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But if every emotion you feel is tied to how someone else responds, if your peace rises and falls based on unread texts or vague messages, how can you truly become yourself? You're not living, you're reacting, you're not choosing, you're adjusting. And life was never meant to be a series of emotional calculations, of how little to feel, how much to hide, how long to wait. That's not love. That's survival. That's dependency dressed as devotion. Real detachment doesn't numb you. It frees you. It frees you from the obsession of being enough, from the illusion that love must be earned, from the belief that silence is your fault, from the anxiety of always having to guess what they want. Because once you detach, you stop chasing validation and start offering presence, not as a bargain, but as a gift. You don't disappear to punish. You step back to protect. You don't withhold to manipulate. You create space to breathe. You don't love less. You love clearer, cleaner, wiser. You understand now that attachment built on fear is not intimacy. It's insecurity with good lighting. So if you're afraid that detaching makes you cold, ask yourself, what is colder, suffering in silence, or finally honoring your limits? If you're worried that you'll lose them, ask yourself, what have you already lost, trying to keep them? And if you wonder if they'll miss you, maybe the better question is, will you miss the version of yourself who was always begging to be chosen? Emotional detachment is not the end of a connection. It's the beginning of clarity. Clarity that says, I am here, but I will not chase. I care, but I will not compromise my dignity. I love, but I love myself too. And that changes everything. Not because it forces others to act differently, but because you finally stop needing them to. You don't beg to be seen. You see yourself. You don't wait for them to return. You return to your center. You don't fear the silence. You become it. That's not giving up. That's growing up. And that's what detachment really is. There is a strange thing that happens when you go quiet. Not loud, not angry, just quiet. No announcements, no revenge posts, no indirect stories on social media. Just absence. And in that absence, something begins to shift, not just in them, but in you. The human brain isn't designed to handle uncertainty well. It wants to fill in the gaps, close the loops, make sense of patterns. When someone is always available, the brain creates a shortcut. She's always there. It files that presence under certain, predictable, safe, and then to stop seeing her, not because she changed, but because she became part of the mental background noise. But when you suddenly disappear, not out of spite, but out of self-respect, a psychological gap is created, and gaps demand answers. Why is she quiet? Did I do something wrong? Is she seeing someone else? Has she stopped caring? Did she finally get tired? Is she done waiting for me? Let me tell you about Layla. She spent months being everything to him. The emotional cheerleader, the safety net, the late-night listener, the woman who always texted first. He liked her. He even told her, "You're amazing. I just need time." So she gave him time, and space, and understanding, until one day, she gave him silence. Not with anger, not with a plan. She just stopped being available, stopped sending the first text, stopped asking how his day was, stopped making excuses for his absence. And do you know what happened? He noticed, but not immediately. At first, he felt the quiet as a relief, but then the relief turned to restlessness, then discomfort, then questions, because the constant stimulus he had once taken for granted was no longer there to cushion his ego. This is the psychology of absence. What is scarce feels sacred. What is predictable feels invisible. It's not manipulation. It's how the mind works, and this truth applies to love, to attention, to energy. Carl Jung wrote extensively about the unconscious reactions people have to loss, to distance, to withdrawal. He believed that when something familiar is taken away, we begin to project meaning from our own depths onto that absence. In other words, it's not your silence that affects them. It's what your silence triggers in their subconscious. Their guilt, their regret, their confusion, their fear, their curiosity. That's what echoes when you're gone. But let's be very clear. You don't disappear to get them back. You don't create distance to prove a point. You step back to return to yourself. Because while absence creates reflection in others, it creates restoration in you. You begin to realize how much time you spent trying to make them see you instead of seeing yourself. How much energy you poured into a connection that was draining instead of nurturing. How much you bent, not out of flexibility, but out of fear. And slowly, you begin to unlearn. You unlearn the habit of measuring your worth by how quickly someone replies. You unlearn the instinct to chase after silence as if it's a personal failure. You unlearn the idea that your value is dependent on how needed you are. Distance becomes your teacher, your mirror, your protector. It teaches you that the ones who truly care don't need constant reminders to treat you right. It shows you that you don't have to overextend to earn love, to be chosen, to be enough. It reminds you that being wanted is not the same as being respected. Let's go back to Layla. Weeks after her silence, he reached out. He said, "I miss you. I didn't realize how much until you stopped being around." But by then, Layla had changed. She wasn't angry. She wasn't playing games. She just wasn't available anymore. Because in her own silence, she had found her voice. In her own absence, she had found her center. She didn't disappear to punish. She disappeared to heal. And now, she wasn't reacting. She was choosing. So the next time you're tempted to over-explain, to overgive, to overstay, ask yourself, what would happen if I simply allowed space? Not as revenge, but as a reset. Not as punishment, but as protection. Not as a strategy, but as self-worth. Absence is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new one, where your peace is no longer dependent on their attention, where your presence is no longer offered without intention, where your love is no longer something they assume, but something they learn to cherish. Jung believed that value emerges only when there is contrast. Without darkness, we can't see light. Without silence, we don't notice sound. Without absence, there is no awareness of presence. You don't need to be remembered. You need to remember who you are. And when you do, you become unforgettable, not because of how much you gave, but because of how powerfully you returned to yourself. Let's be honest, you're not too sensitive. You're not too emotional. You're not overreacting. You're overattached. And because of that, you're overthinking everything. You're thinking about the message he didn't reply to, the change in his tone, the timestamp on that Instagram story, the way he looked at you today, or didn't. You're analyzing silence, reading between lines that were never even spoken, guessing what he meant by, "It's not a good time," wondering if you pushed too hard or didn't do enough. You keep replaying conversations, looking for clues, as if you're solving a puzzle. But it's not a puzzle. It's a trap you built by making his response the mirror of your worth. Let me tell you something brutal, but healing. If you were secure in your place, you wouldn't need to overthink it. If you trusted yourself, you wouldn't second-guess every move. If you felt chosen, you wouldn't be trying to decode silence. Overthinking is not intelligence. It's anxiety in disguise. It's your mind trying to create clarity in a place your heart knows is unsafe. It's the brain working overtime because your soul is starving for answers that won't come. Not because you're not worthy, but because you're looking for answers in someone who never speaks clearly to begin with. Let me introduce you to Anna. Anna was the kind of woman who showed up fully, with open arms, with honest words, with real presence, and for months, she tried to understand him, why he disappeared for days, why he gave half effort, why his words never matched his actions. She'd stay up until 3 a.m., staring at her phone, replaying their conversations, wondering if she had said something wrong. She read articles, watched YouTube videos, even asked tarot cards, trying to understand him. But the truth was, she didn't need more information. She needed permission. Permission to walk away from the confusion, from the waiting, from the need to constantly make sense of someone who never once tried to make her feel safe. Carl Jung said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." So why do you believe someone's potential over their pattern? Why do you keep analyzing the maybes when the truth is written in what they choose not to do? Overthinking isn't intuition. It's a trauma response. It's what you learned when you had to work hard to earn love. It's the inner child trying to fix chaos by being good enough, smart enough, quiet enough. And even now, in adult relationships, that part of you still believes that if you can just figure it out, they'll stay, they'll change, they'll love you better. But love doesn't work like that. Love isn't solved, it's felt. Detachment is the medicine your mind is asking for, not because you should stop caring, but because your nervous system can't keep surviving in constant uncertainty. Detachment says, "I am done thinking my way into a place that still feels unsafe." Detachment says, "I'm not looking for closure from someone who never offered clarity." Detachment says, "My peace is more important than being right, or chosen, or understood." Let me say this again, for the version of you who keeps checking their phone, who keeps refreshing the chat, who keeps editing their own personality to seem more lovable. You are not confused. You are avoiding the truth, because the truth will cost you something you're afraid to lose. But you know what costs more? Your mental health, your sleep, your self-worth, your freedom. Anna eventually stopped overthinking, not because she got answers, but because she stopped waiting for them. She chose clarity over closeness. She chose stability over suspense. She chose herself, and that's what broke the cycle. So ask yourself today, why do I feel the need to analyze this so much? Why do I care this deeply about someone who rarely shows me the same? Why does my mind never rest around them? If love feels like overwork, it's not love, it's fear of loss, wearing a romantic mask. Carl Jung believed that what we overthink is what we're afraid to feel. So maybe it's time to stop thinking and start feeling the truth. You're not being rejected. You're being redirected to a place inside you that doesn't need to perform to be seen, where silence doesn't hurt, because peace lives there, where you don't need a reply to know you're enough. That's detachment, not from the person, but from the illusion that you must overgive to be kept. There comes a moment when the shift happens, and no, it doesn't come with fireworks or applause or even clarity. It comes quietly, like a breath you didn't know you were holding, like a tension in your shoulders finally released. It comes when you realize you're no longer hoping, no longer checking, no longer craving a message that doesn't arrive. And the surprising part? You're not sad anymore. You're free. This is the energy shift, the sacred movement, from needing to choosing, from please love me to I love myself enough to let go, from why did they do this to me to what part of me kept allowing it. Carl Jung believed that all true transformation begins when the unconscious becomes conscious, when the things we once tolerated are seen not as fate, but as choice. Needing is chaotic. It creates desperation. It makes you shrink. It makes you compromise. It makes you accept half effort, as if it's generosity. But choosing is calm. It's clear. It's powerful. It feels like stillness, not silence, like intention, not waiting. Let's talk about Maya. Maya used to need love, like it was oxygen. She needed text to feel wanted. She needed attention to feel alive. She needed reassurance to feel okay. But one day, after months of begging, pleasing, apologizing, explaining herself into emotional exhaustion, she snapped, not in anger, but in awakening. She stopped trying to win him, stopped performing stability, stopped trying to fix someone who didn't want to be fixed. She looked in the mirror and whispered something she had never said before. I choose me. That was the day she reclaimed her energy, not by blocking him, not by punishing him, but by directing her focus back into herself, her body, her peace, her joy, her truth. And something amazing happened, not just outside, but inside. She no longer felt that pull to check her phone, to explain her worth, to chase clarity in chaos, because she was no longer available for people who fed off her self-doubt. She became someone who no longer needed to be chosen, because she had already chosen herself. This is the shift from emotional dependency to energetic sovereignty. You stop tying your happiness to how someone else feels about you and start tying it to how you feel about you. You stop defining your value by your ability to hold space for others and start valuing your ability to protect space for yourself. You stop needing to be remembered and start remembering who you truly are. Needing is about survival. Choosing is about expansion. Needing says, please don't leave me. Choosing says, I trust myself enough to walk away. Needing clings. Choosing releases, not to escape, but to evolve. Carl Jung once wrote, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. So who are you becoming? Now that you're no longer waiting? Who are you becoming? Now that you've detached, not out of bitterness, but out of love for your own life. Who are you? Without the story of pain, without the need to be needed, without the fear of being alone? You are clarity. You are calm. You are a woman who no longer begs to be seen because her light cannot be ignored. You are the one who walks away, not to punish, but to protect, the one who disappears, not to be chased, but to return home to herself. And you'll know the shift has happened, not because they come back, but because you don't care if they do, not because they apologize, but because you've already forgiven yourself for staying too long, for giving too much, for losing yourself in the name of love. So the next time someone says, "You've changed," you can smile and say, "I didn't change. I just stopped abandoning myself." That is the real power of emotional detachment, not coldness, but clarity, not absence, but sovereignty, not punishment, but peace. And once you reach that space, you never settle for less again, because the woman who chooses herself becomes magnetic, not for what she offers, but for what she protects, not for how she pleases, but for how she preserves her peace, not because she's easy to get, but because she's not easy to forget.